During my summer vacations when I was in high school and the first 2 years of college, my father, who was a home builder, gave me an offer that I could not refuse under the circumstances. For a minimum wage, which was $1.40 per hour, as I recall, in 1967, when I started to work for him during the summer, I would perform manual labor type jobs starting at 6 a.m. in the morning. The reason for that starting time is that the day would quickly heat up to 90 plus degrees with high humidity. And the general idea was for the hard and difficult outside labor to be done before the temperature went into the 90s. And then the work would shift into indoor work when available, except when I was batterboarding homes, which could be done throughout the day. After my sophomore year in college, I had worked my way all the way up to $2 an hour by always being on time, never uttering a word of dissent to my father's instructions and assigned tasks, which included such things as cleaning out a 5-foot high culvert that had been flooded with mud with a small shovel in my bare hands, and always being attentive to the details as I've always been. I decided to ask my father for a raise to $2.25 an hour, a 25% boost. He looked at me with his piercing blue eyes as if the laser beams were about to be sent in my direction. So I started to, bob and weave a little bit in order to dodge those eye laser beams. And then he said to me the following, and I quote, "I am already paying you more than you're worth," end of quote. Well, I did not disagree with him, which would have been an exercise in futility anyways. But I had already developed quickly a workaround for his decision. I went and told my mother, who they had married just before Pearl Harbor in December 1941, exactly what he had told me, and I got my 25-cent per hour raise. Batterboarding was one of the more physically demanding tasks that I was asked to perform. While I would not purport to know how it is done now, I can describe, based on considerable personal experience, how it was done in 1968 to 1971. The purpose of the exercise is to lay out the foundation of a home. To accomplish that task, a number of wooden stakes would have to be driven into the ground. One person would hold the stake to steady it, while the other person would hit it as hard as possible with a sledgehammer. Prayers were optional during that process, but I never hit the other guy at all, and he never hit me. The temperature would be 90 to 100 when that was occurring, very humid, and the activity would be occurring in mostly an uncleared field, whose other inhabitants included snakes and other small creatures. My much older brother said he once encountered a rattlesnake, but I discount that observation. The ground would be really, really hard. There would generally be no rain for a week or more. And as and the wooden stakes we would be using would already have a dull point because they had been used in prior occasions, and it would not be a sharp point at all anymore. After we hammered it several times, we would look down and see a few scattered chips of Tennessee clay, barely an eighth of an inch, maybe a quarter of an inch. Several stakes had to be driven in the ground for just one house, and then a string would be strung to provide instructions for laying out for the foundation. Besides the free suntan and workout, that experience at least taught me the value of a dollar. And I made every dollar that I was paid during those years work for me. And that included taking out every single U.S. Mint coin that had a silver content out of circulation for face value that I later sold when silver had increased to over $42 an ounce. In 1964 and prior years, the silver content of dimes, quarters, and half dollars was at 90%. Also bought numismatic U.S. gold pieces when the price was around $35 an ounce, as I recall. It was illegal back then in the 60s to own Krugerrands or Canadian maple leafs, but you could own numismatic gold, and I would search for very common dates where I would be getting a price close to the per ounce value of the gold. I started selling some of those in 2011 when gold went over $1,900 an ounce. And I bought my first stock in around 1968. It was called HCA. And it was soon after its IPO when it had one hospital called Parkview near Vanderbilt University in Nashville. The company, many years later, went private and then went public again. I think it only went private once and is now publicly traded.